Hello. Welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator of POW, and I'm delighted to have my friend Amparo, Leyman Pino, here with us today to talk a little bit about language and the use of language as an interpretive tool in cultural institutions. But before we dive into that, maybe Amparo, you could talk a little bit about your background.
Of course. Hi, Paul. Hello from Berkeley to the other side.
Yeah, that's right. Coast to coast on Museum FAQ.
Exactly. And as you were saying, my name is Amparo Leyman Pino. I'm originally from Mexico City. I started my career in the Children's Museum of Mexico City, and I started as an explainer. Down there.
Me too, but not in Mexico.
Yeah.
But not in Mexico.
Not in Mexico. But in Mexico, the explainers are called cuate, which is a Nahuatl word that means friend. Es mi cuate, it's my friend. So I started as a cuate. I'm in the second cohort of cuates of Papalote. Papalote opened in October 93, and I joined the museum in March in 94. So I had the privilege to be in the very first cohorts of a museum as an explainer. And from there, my colleague, mentor, and boss, Maribel Ibarra, I worked with her took me from the floor and took me to the exhibits department. So I was the first person in education. My background is in psychology. I have a BS in psychology, a master's in education, but I was still in college when this happened. I finished college and she was like, come to my team. And that changed my life. It changed my life to not only know how to play with the kids and be on floor, but how to create those environments, learning environments, to continue playing with children on floor and families. And you have to remember that in Mexico, people come as a family, complete family to these type of places. And Papalote was always packed back then, and I hope they're still on. And now I'm being an exported talent. It's been 13 years that I live in California. And from 94, I started in Papalote. I've been doing a lot of things. I co-founded a private school. I was the director of Future Kids, which is our franchise system for computer skills, teaching computer skills for children. I've been a counselor in a high school with high school students. And I've been consulting for many years, first with Papalote, then with other institutions. I have worked in the Middle East, in Europe, here in the US, and of course in my country of origin, Mexico.
Wow, what a multifaceted resume. That's awesome. So today, I thought we could talk a little bit about especially how to use language. Language is important in museums and exhibits and programs, but using language as an interpretive tool. And I was saying to you just a little earlier, many people, when they think about language in museums, they probably think about bilingual or multilingual labels or interpretation, which is great. They should be thinking about that. But also, I know you have done work related to blended language and also language neutral environments. So maybe you could just give us all a little bit of background, a little primer on sort of the different approaches towards using language in museums and cultural institutions. And then maybe from there, you could launch into some things that you think are important for people to consider in their own situations, tools or tips or techniques that you find helpful, especially since you've worked around the world and you weren't, I'm assuming you weren't always a native speaker in every situation in the Middle East or in Asia. So anyway, if you could give us a little primer about those different kinds of things, blended language, language neutral, multilingual, and then things you think are important for people to consider wherever they
Of course. And it's a very fascinating topic. I've been becoming expert on these multilingual exhibits and bilingual exhibits, even since I was in Mexico. You know, Paparote used to bring a lot of temporary exhibits, IMAX movies, and resources from the US, Canada, and abroad for all over the place. So the art of putting those resources, exhibits, etc., educational guides accessible to our audiences in full Spanish was my first exposure to this. And it's not just the language, but also the cultural adaptation. There are things that work very well in the US and for the US market or the US communities, but not for the Mexico City or Mexico as a country culture. So, just for, as an example, I do remember that we had the IMAX movie called Arabia, and it was about the Arab world and everything from the perspective of the or the lens from the US, right? Which is okay, but they produce the IMAX movie, etc. But when we brought this movie to Mexico, and you think that Spanish has been impacted by Arabic because of the invasion of the Arabs to the south of Spain, and how many things in our culture, in our language, are salt and peppered with Arabic words and situations that had to change in the educational guide that was not considered in the English version. But in the Spanish version, for us, it was like a goal. Let's think about words that comes from Arabic. Let's think about things that we say that comes from Arabic. For example, in Spanish, we say ojalá, like I wish or hope, right? That it's God provides. Oh, Allah. And it becomes from Arabic, right? So, and it's in our language in every moment. So we need to capture those things in order to make the connection with your audience, right? So that was my first like step in this work. But then when I moved to the US and I was bridging more the resources between Mexico and the United States, there was a need to put these resources in Spanish. So I was a fierce advocate, for example, with the NICENET, now the National Informal Science Education Network, back then focused on nano. Well, I said, we need to put this in Spanish. Raise your hand if you're with me. And the hands were many. And we started making a movement of putting all these resources accessible to audiences who speak Spanish. So with this in mind, I'm thinking about, well, we're going to put this in Spanish. And at the same time, I was in another project, nothing to do with museums, with the Catholic Church. I was writing some curriculum, and it was for the Americas. And I was obviously writing in my Mexican Spanish. And when the reviewers came along, they were like, this word doesn't, I don't understand it. This word, I don't get it. Like, we need to think about neutral Spanish. It's not just the Spanish that we speak in my country, right? We have a word for conversation that is not used in other countries in Latin America. We say platicar, and in other places they say conversar. So those nuances come with the culture of the person who's speaking and the voice that you're putting in the labels or any resource that you're putting in your museum or your printed materials. So with that in mind, we started another like level of professionalism of these bilingual exhibits on thinking on how to do neutral Spanish science communication that is friendly, right? We have two forms, a very formal one, usted, and a very common one, tú. And in the English version, they're always super friendly, the labels. And then when they switch to Spanish, like, so usted está viendo. It's too formal, too square, too uptight. And we need to have to put the same flavor in both languages. So
it's I was just going to say it's interesting. It's sort of what you say about neutral Spanish, for example, it's sort of a cautionary tale. You know, I think sometimes people think, oh well, I can just enter the text in Google Translate and that'll take care of everything. And obviously, it won't.
There are nuances. It's Spanish in itself. You can understand what you're saying, but there are some things that you're like, when do you refer to that, right? A Colombian from a Mexican, from a Peruvian, from a person from Spain. We all speak Spanish. We can't talk to each other. There will be one word here, one word there that we're like, what do you mean by that? Or don't say that word. It's like too much in my country, right? So we need to be like careful. And again, language, language and culture, they come very close to each other. So we need to take care of those environments. So working, I've been doing a lot of work in that regard of really taking care of that the Spanish that we're putting is comes across and is super respectful to everybody and it's very inclusive because we cannot make it very Argentinian or very Mexican or very whatever, right? We need to make it accessible for everybody. I was working a project with the Virtual Science Center. We made their exhibit Reinventing Reality. We put it in Spanish and French. And same case with French. The team that works with me, I don't speak French. I don't do the French part, but my team was very focused on doing the same thing with the same methodology to achieve a neutral French. And the discussions were very interesting. Again, I don't speak French, but you can see in the team things like, well, but in Canada, this is very important to say it this way, right? But in France, it's more this other way. So you have to take care of those things. So it's not just a translation or Google Translation or, oh, let's hire just a translator that doesn't know how to put the things into a learning interactive environment. It's not a book, right? It's something that you are placed at, you're looking at, you're moving around. So it requires that context in to be considered. But
So
then, yeah,
I was going to say, so that I think helps give people the examples you gave related to Spanish and French. I think that gives people a good sense of thinking about language neutral environments or language neutral interpretation. But what about blended language? I don't know if you could talk about projects or some specifics to give people some context for what you mean or what we mean when you're speaking about blended language.
but let me go back to language neutral because we have had other projects with our institutions that they cater so many languages to too many communities. And which ones are you gonna pick first? And second, sometimes you don't have the budget to put everything in 3, 4 languages, right? The California Academy of Sciences, I work with them for their multilingual exhibit. They have 4 languages, but not everybody has that opportunity. So at the Lawrence School of Science, we flip it and we make language neutral. Which things can we remove the language from that object or that experience and use graphics, videos, um, scientific names, photos, everything that will be accessible to anybody, and it doesn't matter which language you speak, because being in a multicultural institution like UC Berkeley and catering to people from everywhere in the world, you cannot put these things in 4, 5, 6 languages. And on top of that, you don't have the budget to do it. So we move to language neutrality. How can we communicate without having a language barrier? So that's what we mean by language neutral. So one thing is, let's do Spanish neutral because we need to understand the same with this language. Then you have 100% language neutral, which is we're going to put things accessible to anybody. Doesn't matter which language, or even if you have acquired written skills for that, or reading skills for that language, you can navigate the exhibits, environments, and children's museums were our teachers for these type of exhibits. And now blended language, it's a
Wait,
different
wait, well, but I'm gonna just say one last thing about
thing.
language neutral before we move on. It's interesting the example you gave at the Lawrence Hall of Science, or of course I immediately think of institutions in New York City where you might have dozens of different languages.
Europe.
Yeah, Europe, of course. It's interesting. It's a different way to think about universal design,
Oh yeah.
really using language
Oh yeah.
in a universal design sense. So it's how can you set up this environment and calibrate your designs, your multimedia, whatever, to um, be as broadly accessible to people regardless of their language.
And that's the whole point of doing this bilingual, multilingual, blended language and language neutral. How the question that you need to put in your head is, what is the accessibility goal? What is the inclusion goal? And that's why when I was saying blended language, it's a different story because we did it with the intention of having people who speak one or and the other language at the same time in the same room. So the Monterey Bay Aquarium came to me and say, "Oh, we want you to design things for people who speak Spanish from the Latin American diaspora." And I'm like, why don't we give them the same programs that you have? Why? How can we make them in a way, or create them or adapt them in a way that is for everybody? You don't go to Starbucks and they tell you, "Oh, are you from Mexico? You're gonna get only Mexican coffee, right? Are you from, sorry, you're from a place that they don't have coffee, you're gonna have a tea." You don't have that, right? So even though McDonald's has a good market, every country, McDonald's has something very specific from that country, which is very interesting and a cultural experience whenever you are traveling. But in this case, when you're an institution and you're offering X to your audience, it has, sorry, but it has to be accessible for everybody. You cannot say, "Sorry, only people with eyes can be here, people with legs here, people," you need to think about this is for everybody. So these are programs that are presented live, that are presented in front of the audience with a microphone, with the kelp forest behind, with a diver inside the kelp forest, with the penguins and the penguins caretakers inside this ecosystem for the penguins. Or in we have also one auditorium presentation about the otters and how they rescue otters, which is a beautiful program at the aquarium. So, but we started with the kelp forest, and we said, how can we make it work for both audiences at the same time? And I was like, oh, desert at night at the Nat. It's, I don't know if you have seen that exhibit or the people that are watching this video, but it's clever. It's super clever. I worked with that project. I was an advisor, cultural advisor for that project for the summative evaluation, and then I did an assessment of the neutrality of the Spanish, etc.
Did you work with Beth Redmond Jones, or
I worked with Randy Korn directly,
in
and
terms of the evaluation?
but because I started as the advisor for the evaluation, and then when I did my comments of, is Argentinian the person who's in charge of this translation, they were like, how do you know? Well, because this word, this word, this word, this word is
certain words.
Yeah, again, it's the neutrality, right? So even though it's cute, your community that you're catering is the Tijuana, Mexico community. You're not gonna use the Italian words that they were adapted to Argentinian, that is largos instead of patio. And patio is more common. Even, I said, great cognate to go from English to Spanish, right?
Sure.
So anyway, with that thing, I worked then with Beth and Erica Kelly, that both now are at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, just things of life that goes around and around.
the
So
the places change, but the faces always stay the same. So
same family, same colleagues, yes. So with them, I was like, we need to do the think a way to replicate this at night, but imagine with your program. So it's a presenter and speaks a little bit in Spanish, a little bit in English, a little bit in Spanish, a little bit in English, but it's not an echo. You're not repeating because for a person like me who's bilingual, it's tedious. It's hard. You lose like la 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 la. It's not an echo, right? You need to have a conversation, and the conversation needs to flow. So I expose myself, and I have the privilege to travel to places where I don't speak the local language. So I was at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, and I was like, I'm gonna go to every program here, every program. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna expose myself, and I'm gonna make notes of the things that worked for me. That and that was before I learned German, and then I went after I learned German, some German in. And then I was like making my notes and then going to another country where I don't speak the language and going to the programs in French, in other languages, right? So with that thing, we decided how to balance the amount of English versus the Spanish, the how to switch from one language to the other. When is the moment to switch? Well, we need to have a full idea in one language and then switch. Which things are your visuals that are behind the presenter or next to the presenter, or props that you have in your hand, right? Like, oh, we have this, and this guide is important, and you show it, right? So even though you're not understanding what they're talking about, you said, oh, it's something about that booklet, or it's something about that fish, or it's, oh, and the diver is also bilingual, the one that is inside. So if the person outside is asking the question in English, he, she, or they, the diver is kind of repeats the question in the other language and saying, oh, yeah, what you're asking me about these sardines is blah, 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 answers the question. So we curated in a way that it's a conversation, that it flows between one language to the other. We also created with cognate words. So we think very well which the choice of words that we're going to do from one language to the other. So you can, even though you're not understanding what's going on, you can pick one, two, three words from the other language because are somehow familiar to you, like tuna, atún, right? Or person, persona. There's some words that you can play with them, right? Or you can use also your body language. Oh, they're están muy chiquitos. So your body language is also the language neutrality again comes in very handy to use these type of things to communicate with the audience.
So, sorry to ask an ignorant question. So, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, all these language interpretation approaches sort of fall along a spectrum. They don't necessarily clearly fall into, okay, this is blended and this is neutral. I mean, it seems like even in the blended aspect, you're using universal and neutral approaches. In the blended aspect, let's say between English and Spanish, are you are you incorporating? I'm just going to say Spanglish, but is that part of this, or is that something completely different?
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying because for some people, Spanglish is, for example, when you use words from English and you make it in Spanish. For example, the young yard, the junkyard. That's a difficult word for me. The junkyard. In some places in the north of Mexico, it's called el yonque. That's Spanish, right? It's a blended one word of something. Or la yarda. They're calling the yard, your patio, la yarda. It's totally incorrect in Spanish. Yarda in Spanish is the yard, 3 yards, 4 yards of something, right? Totally incorrect. But that's how the language has evolved with immigration, right? And on all those things. we have a museum in the border between, well, in Ciudad Juarez, which is the city, sister city of El Paso. And we have an exhibit about Caló, the jargon of the border cities or the border states, and how this Spanglish comes along, right? But nonetheless, in this case, we started saying or calling it Spanglish, but some people are very like proper, and even I have linguists in my team who are advisors for all these projects. They were like, that's not Spanglish. You're doing something different. And that's how we came up with blended language as a term to call these. So we don't use Spanglish in this. We do sentences. So we start a sentence, an idea in English or Spanish, and then we continue the idea in the other language. And it has to be a complete idea. It has to be like in grammar, a subject, a verb, and direct object. It has to be like, this is happening, it has to be a complete idea.
So I'll just ask another. I'll ask another
Yeah.
ignorant question. I mean,
Please.
is to even use the term Spanglish, is that considered an offensive term, or is blended language is probably a more properly descriptive term? But I'm just curious about that, and then we'll move on.
It's a beautiful question because, for example, Desert at Night is considered Spanglish, but the way the people are talking in the video, in the experience of Desert at Night, is how people in San Diego, Tijuana speak, and they speak Spanish. In the blended language that we do at the Monterey Bay Aquarium is blended language. It's Spanish and English switching back and forth, one from the other, with cognate words that connect both worlds, with visual aids that help you fill the blanks. So for a person that doesn't speak one of either languages, is like blah 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 patio, blah 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 person, blah 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 amigo. That you don't know that word in Spanish. Maybe you don't speak Spanish, but amigo, everybody knows it, right? Or things like that. So taquitos, because sometimes they talk about the food and the fish and blah blah blah, and you're like, oh, I know that word, I know they're talking about food. So that's kind of the idea of the blended language. Now, to get to that version, now it's tips and tricks. To get to that version, we need to do a translation in the pure sense of the exercise. We first, from a very well done narrative in English, or the, let's call it the origin language, you go to a very good Spanish version. Like from English, you do the Spanish, like the perfect Spanish.
So is that sort of the foundation that you would, or the approach that you would use in any of these instances? So if you were, let's say you were or reverse, whatever, you were starting in Chinese, and then you were doing bringing an exhibition to Mexico, you would want to have, then you would already have your Chinese transcript, and then you would want to have a strong Spanish translation.
Yeah.
And so then you could, that's your foundation that you can start and think about how to, the approaches you want to take.
Yeah. You got the source language, and then the translation. Perfect. Like if you, you have to do it, and all the things that we do at Yellow Cow. I never said that my company's Yellow Cow, but everything that we do at Yellow Cow.
We'll put your website at the end, trust me, okay, so that people know about Amparo's work and her website. But absolutely.
Anyway, what we do with us is that if you read our Spanish or French, in this case of the BSc, you don't know which one is the father language. We do it in a way that you're like, which one is the original, So that has to happen with blended language. You have to have a perfect translation that you don't know which one is the source, right? So then you can play and create the blended language. because you have, it's like Legos. You have the pieces, and then you say two from here, two from here, two from here, two, and then there's another level of complexity because you have timed videos that they use for the English version only. They have, you cannot be more than 15 minutes because that's the span of attention and that's the length of every program, at least in the case of the Monterey Aquarium. You can you cannot, for example, talk only in Spanish for a long time and only in English for a long time, because you can lose either party, the people who only speak one language only, whatever this is, will be like, who knows at what time. So you need to
So do you
time
use
things.
do you use subtitles in a situation like that, or you just still use the blended techniques?
Blended technique, and it's live, and the person memorizes this. The person that is doing, Mariana del Valle, which is kudos for, because she's our champion at the Monterey Aquarium. Lauren, who was the first person who did it, and I'm not forgetting the name of this super lovely gentleman who was also a great presenter at the Monterey Aquarium. Kudos for these people because they have been our pioneers, guinea pigs, partners, right? So they have like an iPhone where they are moving the movies, that changing the audio visuals. They have a microphone. They have to look at this, and they have to be switching the two languages live and on the fly and memorize it. And they need to, and there are also seasons with the animals, right? So where when the penguins are molting, when they're changing their, did I say it right? When
Yeah,
they're changing
molting, correct.
thank you. They're changing their feathers. There's one narrative that when they're not. So you cannot say like, well, you can tell that they're and all the penguins with feathers. So you cannot say that, right? You need to be talking about the things that are really happening live there. If the sardines are not doing the show that you're expecting to do, you cannot say that or and such, right? You're playing with whatever is happening in the open sea exhibit, which is super cool exhibit. You know, it's like you're in the super deep ocean or in the kelp forest. Yes, the diver is throwing fish here and there and making things happen. But if they don't, you need to be ready to continue the narrative and talking things and be switching English
So,
to Spanish.
that sounds like another important foundational tip that you need to build flexibility into your language interpretation. It's not even in a case where you've done the careful translation work and you've thought about the approaches, blended or neutral or what have you. It's still not one size fits all, especially in a case like that where you are the situation might change depending on what time of the year or what you're looking at. So you can't, yeah, like you say, and here are the sardines, and then there are no sardines there. So
Yeah. Or oh, the rockfish, and the rockfish is
somewhere
in a
else.
party in the back of the conference. You cannot do that. But it's my full respect for these people who are doing this. One thing is that we have the idea, and the other thing is to implement it, right? It's been a journey, and we've been iterating this. We have done um, 4 exhibits and 1 auditorium, or 3 exhibits and 1 auditorium. I think 3 exhibits and 1 auditorium, which is called Forest, Open Sea, Penguins, and Luna, which is a theater. And the theater is a documentary. So it's a video, and the video is non-stop. You cannot like stop and finish the idea because then something else is happening in the video. That was very intense work to really do the timing. And then sometimes what we play is with the order of the words. Oh, maybe rephrase it this way, and then perfect timing, and then perfect timing. Take away this idea. You have to sacrifice, and you have to take out some things and put others, and then think about. better mention this than this other thing, or this has to be in English because it doesn't impact, or is going to impact the narrative, that this part is going to be in English. There are a lot of like jokes and puns and things like that that explainers do it very nicely in every institution. And we need to do the same in Spanish. It cannot be super funny in English and in Spanish, again, the formal version and very scientific. So we have to also put the jokes. And then we said, oh, the tunas are like footballs. How are we gonna say that in Spanish? Like, oh, bolillos, which is a French roll, right? So it's like it's como un bolillo. So the people that speak Spanish, and when you're doing the program, you see the faces of everybody like paying attention, and then they joke in Spanish, and the people who gets it is like
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then it was like, and then it changes. The joke is in English, and the people who don't speak English are like It's really interesting how, but people stay. We were very scared the first time we did it. We thought that people were gonna stand up and leave because there's like housekeeping announcement, and on those announcements is one of those is today is a special day, and we're gonna have a blended language. This program is gonna be in Spanish and English. Please stay. We have had full house every time, and well, now we're COVID-19, and we were going to have the programs throughout the summer. We started these programs in special days for the community days, Día del Niño, Fiesta del Mar, and now the aquarium. Kudos for Vicky Baberchak, who is the director of programs. She championed for having these programs in a regular basis, and it was going to be piloted this summer to have them as part of the regular program. So unfortunately, we don't know if the aquarium is going to be open to the public and when, but we're in the hopes that when that happens, we're going to be able to practice more these programs when it's a regular audience, and not just when we're expecting an X amount of a Spanish speaking audience to attend.
Well, that's a good sign that when you do a program that people stay and don't all stand up and walk out. That's a sure sign if people stand up and walk out that you're not being successful. So it sounds like definitely when you're thinking about these programs, we've just been talking about flexibility, and you made it clear the place you need to start is to have a sort of strong version in each of the languages you're working with so that you can use those as tools. Um, any other last sort of foundational tool or tip in our waning moments here that you think is important for people to think about when they're developing their own programs and using language as an interpretive tool?
My fierce advice, and you can read it in the articles that I have published about this, is proofreading. It's so important to proofread. It's so important to involve other people, to read, to listen, to participate. At the aquarium, we do the blended language. We proofread. We're like 10 people, internal people from the aquarium. I'm the only one external, but I'm the translator, and I am working on the creation of the program. So I'm very implicated. So I need other eyes, other ears, and we pilot a lot. We practice a lot, and when we practice, we invite people who only speak English, who only speak Spanish, who are bilingual, to be part of our fake audience, to pilot these programs, so they can give us feedback and say, when I was watching this, I didn't get it because you were talking a lot of Spanish or a lot of English, whatever it was, right? So that's a note for us to say we need to balance, right? And practice and proofread. That would be my two main tips of do whatever you want to do, but you need to proofread. You have no idea how many museums I have gone
No,
in my life.
no, I
When I'm
know.
reading, I'm like, really?
Yeah, it's funny. Even after many people look at something and then there you are on opening night and you see a typo or something in the exhibit panel or the entry panel. Yeah.
For one language, right?
Yeah.
For
Sure.
one language, forget about the bilingual part.
Right.
For one language, we are like reviewing. Do the same for the bilingual, the multilingual. And when you have multilingual exhibits, for example, like the work that I did for the Virtual Science Center, that was French, Spanish, and English, I have a person in my team who's multilingual. I'm very grateful for Gloria Nogales. She was like making sure that English, Spanish, and French, they were all like the same quality, the same tone, the same voice, the same hippity hip, the same, you need to take care of those things because you cannot make it less quality one language than the other. It's kind of disrespectful for the audience that you're trying to reach and include, etc. Well, you need to have these proofreaders, and it's a challenge because I have people from Puerto Rico, Spain, Colombia. I need to have people from other places in the world to check that I'm saying the right thing, right? The aquarium is really nice. They have people from El Salvador, from Costa Rica, Mexico. We have the whole spectrum there, and I have my team who are also checking things. So we're a lot of eyes with different latitudes to check the neutrality of the Spanish but those are the things that we need to be very careful. Even printed materials are more expensive than a presentation that you take the microphone and then the next time you change it, right? That's cheaper.
Sure.
But the printed materials are very, very, very expensive to fix.
Well, Amparo, as always, it's a great pleasure to speak with you and to hear about your work. Your enthusiasm always comes through, which is a big part of your work. So we will direct people to your website, Yellow Cow Consulting. Can they get information about your articles or about your work through the website?
Yeah, we have it there. It's also in my LinkedIn profile, but I have published at exhibition. The 13th issue of, this is spring of 2016, and November, December 2019. This is very recent for the Informal Learning Review. We published This is Mariana and the.
I was going to say there's the aforementioned kelp forest right there.
This is the kelp forest, and yeah, we are very fortunate. This is co-written with Beth Redmond Jones and Vicky Baberchek, and this one with the exhibition. It's a work that I did at the NAT, and is co-authored with Erica Kelly.
Yeah, great.
Our very nice and beloved colleagues.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, thank you, Amparo. I think there's a lot of great information in the conversation we just had, which we'll be happy to share with our colleagues via video. And like I say, we'll put the web address to Yellow Cow Consulting so that people can learn more about you and your work. And again, thanks very much. Always good to see you and hear about your work. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, and a big pow to my good friend, Paul, from California to Long Island.
That's right. This is great when the technology actually works, which it has. So again, thanks again, Amparo. I appreciate it.